that means darkness. That means being lost. That's a very serious thing. It's a real risk. Will you do it with me? And according to the Mormon story, a third said, no, I don't want to grow anymore. I'm not interested in further relationship with you at this point. And God loved them so much, He honored their choice to say no. But there were those of us who said, you bet, bring it on. And here we are. And the whole purpose of mortal existence now is to learn to love. It's to learn to choose into these relationships. But the rest of the story is that God's not the only one in the story. You see, that's what I began with, was the plurality. And so the rest of the story is, I'm not saved unless you are. My exaltation depends on your exaltation. So when it comes down to it, it doesn't really mean a thing unless you're all there with me. Because if a single one of us isn't there, we're all diminished by your absence. So the family becomes the essence of what we're looking at, and we're all in the family. Now this is what the Mormon story is. It's a matter of choice. We would never believe that God would cause us to be saved and enter into this relationship, because to be saved means to enter into a saving relationship with God. And we don't believe that God would ever cause that because He loves us. And we believe that it's the very essence of our religion that we're left free to make this choice. The bottom line, and where I'm going with this, is that the premise of metaphysical monotheism leads to a world where there are no true relationships, where there are truly no others who get to make choices, to a world and a universe where there's really only one being making all the decisions, and therefore there can be no love of this type. That to us is a world that we're just, at least I am really not interested in. And so that's why I wanted to talk about the implications of metaphysical monotheism, because I believe it explains why our Christian, quote-unquote, Jewish and Islamic brothers and sisters see things very differently, because they have a very different beginning point. And as Joseph Smith said in his famous King Follett discourse, if you don't begin right, it will be a very difficult matter to go right. Thank you. Okay, the first question is, please comment on the little couplet, as man is, God once was, as God is, man may become. How much time do you have? Let me put it this way. We believe this literally, that our Father once experienced immortality. And why would He do that? Because we believe that divinity has a potential for growth in a certain respect. You see, we believe that there's a way of having experiential knowledge. You've all read Alma 7, where it says that He learned to succor those through those things that He suffered. We believe that even a being that knows all things can still grow in knowledge in terms of experiential knowledge. And it was very important that even the Father have this kind of first-hand direct experiential knowledge, and He has had. As God now is, I would read God not in the sense of only the Father or only the Son alone, but all three together. As the Godhead is, we may enter into that same divine relationship of love and therefore be deified. And I think that is probably about as far as I want to comment at this point. Okay, it says, I think you are arguing against absolutism and for a finite God. Do you think that is right? First of all, I never think of God as finite. Finite simply has the implication that God is limited and says nothing more. Yes, I do believe that there are certain limitations for God, but I don't believe that limitations are a bad thing. For instance, I believe that limitations in cruelty, ignorance, and stupidity are good things. So I don't think that limitations in and of themselves are necessarily bad. And I do believe that God has certain limitations. For instance, I don't believe that God could make cruelty love. I don't believe that God could make people who freely choose to love Him out of nothing. And so if you want to say that a God who is limited in any sense is finite, I'd say, well, technically, yes, this God is finite. But I also believe that God is supreme. Remember I told you He was El Elyon, the highest. I believe that God has maximal power and knowledge and love. And I believe that calling a being who knows every thought that I've ever had and every atom on the planet Jupiter limited in knowledge is missing the point. I just don't, and Mormons certainly believe that God knows at least that much. So calling God finite, I think, is a misimpression. Then you use phrases like infinite God providing infinite atonement. That's true, but I don't believe that infinite means the same thing here. Infinite atonement, in my view, I'd have to ask, in what respects is God's atonement infinite? I believe it's infinite in its intensity. That is, there is no limit. If we experience pain, there is a certain point at which we will simply pass out, a merciful threshold at which we cease to be conscious. However, that's not so for God. And what I take infinite atonement to mean is that He has infinite capacity for including our experiences in their totality, including suffering, into His. And He's infinite in love. There's no person that He could ever meet that He won't love. End of story. But I don't believe that He's infinite or finite in all respects. And do I believe that the finitism is a fitting view for LDS theology? In one respect, yes, but in most respects, no. And I think that we demean God if we focus merely on limitation and the word finite the way the word finite does. I think we're missing the point. Technically, yes, God is finite, but then everybody who isn't a pantheist believes that God is limited in some respects, because for pantheism, God is the whole of reality. The minute you say that God isn't the whole of reality, you've got to delimit God in some respect, and the minute you do that, He's no longer logically infinite, He's now delimited in some sense. So everybody believes that God is finite in some sense who believes that God is personal. Please compare the various aspects of Jove and Brahma with the traditional Christian understanding of the Trinity. I'm not sure I'm qualified to do that, as much as I'd love to. Does the existence of free agency require that each of us can create causes from nothing? This is a very deep philosophical question. And I would answer no, because we already exist in a material world and in a context, and so there's never such a thing as creation from absolute nothing, because there never has been absolute nothing. It does, however, require that we can create something novel, something that's never been before, something like an artist creating a picture or a new creation that's never been before, by taking and organizing the data that are there into something new. So every free choice we make is taking our experience and spinning it in a way that is creative and novel for us and moving it into a choice. I explain this at great length in my book as to what I mean by this, but free will is not simply making a choice out of nothing or a choice out of a vacuum. It's making a choice in a context in a creative and novel way.
Answer all of them.
Okay.
One more. Let's take one more out of all the questions.
Okay. Okay.
So this is the last one.
Okay.
Or don't be fine.
Oh, doesn't the 17th chapter of John explain the fact that we are all one in purpose and not what the Trinity tries to convey as three in one? Yes and no. Let me explain. I am concerned when Latter-day Saints describe the Trinity very often because we trivialize it. It would be the same way I would trivialize my wife if I were to try to describe her in some ways. And I would never try to do that. When we talk about God being one, we mean much more that they have a common purpose. I was on a football team once, and we all had a common purpose, and it was to win the game, but that didn't make us God. Are you with me? In fact, we were far from it at that particular moment. To be divine is to be in a loving, intimate relationship of indwelling love. And what I mean by indwelling is intense. It means we share our lives in a sense that we're ultimately open and transparent to each other, such that our life force, everything that we are, is invited into another's being. It means that what we share with each other is in common. It means that there's nothing about me that's opaque. It means that we are so intimate with one another that our very lives are the same life. And so let's not talk about separate beings, let's talk about distinct beings that share an indwelling unity. And I love the medieval term perichoresis, this notion of all dancing in unity with one another, with the music swirling in between us, sharing, and we all share it. Not a common purpose, but a common life and dance, the common type of joy that spontaneously springs from being in one another's presence. That's how I would prefer to think of the Trinity. But you're right. I don't think that it means we're one in substance. And in fact, I would reject substance ontology altogether. In fact, I would suggest to you that from my perspective, the entire project of ontotheology is a way of moving away from God rather than a way of moving toward God.
Thank you very much.